let's unpack this with Malcolm Davis. He is a senior analyst in defence strategy and capability issues at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, speaking to us from Canberra in Australia. Malcolm, good to have you on the program. Ukraine's leader says it's time for a new approach in the military. What does Zelenskyy mean by this?
Well, essentially, one of Zelensky's concerns is when the war ends, and hopefully that ends with a Ukrainian victory, a really urgent need will be for Ukraine to join NATO and to join the European Union. And they can't do that if their government is seen to be corrupt. So Reznikov has been defense minister throughout this war. There's been a lot of complaints about how he has not cracked down on corruption in the defense ministry, and that has resulted in shortcomings of supplies going to the field. So I think that Zelenskyy has moved determinedly to remove Reznikov and to put a new person in his place, Umarov, to hopefully address some of these concerns.
And because of the corruption concerns, do you expect to see any more shakeups in government or civil society in Ukraine? Because, as you said, they want to join the European Union and they desperately want to join NATO, and the EU doesn't want to have a country as part of them seen as being corrupt.
Exactly. And so I think that Zelenskyy has to make sure that there is no corruption occurring at high levels. It's impossible to wipe out corruption entirely, but I think he has to go the extra mile to essentially ensure that there is no endemic or systemic corruption occurring across government. And so I would fully expect there'll be others that will essentially be moved on and new people put in their place. But it has to be done in such a way that any new people are kept under a close watch to make sure that the corruption does actually end.
Malcolm, will a new defense minister in Ukraine mean a change in the country's battlefield strategy at all?
I don't think so. I mean, the Ukrainian army counteroffensive is going well, as best as can be expected, given the fact that they're going up against very tough Russian defenses. They have managed to supposedly break through that first line of defense. They're now moving towards Tokmak, which is a key Russian logistics node, and from there, Melitopol. Their goal ultimately is to remove Russia from Crimea. And if you look at the strategic advance, that's where they're headed. Crimea is the decisive point in the Ukrainian counteroffensive campaign. So I think that you will see the Ukrainians continue to advance in that strategic direction to establish a dominant position for the winter and then be ready once the northern spring arrives next year to be able to move on Melitopol and potentially ultimately to Crimea itself.
Well, let's just look at what's happening at Ukraine's ports, because there have been several attacks there over the last 2 days. And it seems, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that Russia's targeting them, especially ahead of talks today with the Turkish president. Is Moscow trying to send a message here?
Obviously. I mean, I think that the Russians are very deliberately targeting ports to try and undermine Ukraine's ability to export grain. We've seen Ukrainians shipping grain out through protected routes. And so the Russians are essentially trying to interrupt that to try and weaken Ukraine's ability to ship that grain. And I think these attacks on the ports will continue and intensify, particularly as the Ukrainians continue to advance south from Zaporizhia Oblast towards Crimea. So I think the Russians are very clearly determined to cut off that supply line for weapons and technology going into Ukraine, but also, more importantly, grain that's coming out of Ukraine to keep Ukraine's economy afloat.
Okay, Malcolm Davis, appreciate your analysis live to us there from the Australian capital. Thanks, Malcolm.
Thank you.